All right, let's talk about custom task in Google Analytics. Custom task, and I'm trying to do this without too much hyperbole, is the most useful tool you can use in Google Tag Manager when you really want to customize your Google Analytics tracking. So in this class, we'll be talking about tasks in general because custom task is just one of those. But our focus will be on custom task because what it actually gives us is an ability to manipulate the hit to Google Analytics before it leaves the website. So it's a truly special way of making sure you add custom dimensions that wouldn't be available to you otherwise. And you can do things like PII filtering, data duplication, and enhancing your setup with all this metadata that you'll pick up from the tracker object itself. So in this lesson, we'll be talking about custom tasks, not just because it's a cool thing and a cool trick to know, but because I'm 100% certain you can take any one of these little tips and really make your setups so much more better and flexible. So if you're ready, let's take a look at custom task for Google Analytics.
This time we'll talk about custom task. And custom task is one of the many tasks in the hit building queue of Analytics.js, the universal analytics JavaScript library used by GTag and Google Tag Manager. Custom task is kind of special because it has no functionality of its own, but it can be used to manipulate the hit that is sent to GA before it gets sent to GA, but after your Google Tag Manager tag has already fired. So it's a very useful thing to use to run interference on what is actually being dispatched to Google Analytics if you want to manipulate that hit somehow, for example. But we'll see a bunch of use cases in this lesson that hopefully will infect you with the same excitement that I have for all things about custom task. The objectives of this lesson are to understand what these tasks actually are and how Google Analytics uses them to compile the request using the measurement protocol. We'll learn how custom task itself works and how it differs from the other tasks GA uses. And finally, we'll talk about all the use cases and the tools we can use to build our own custom tasks with. So we are now at lesson 5. We're midway through the Advanced Google Analytics thematic group. After this, we'll visit enhanced e-commerce before jumping onto other things, specifically the programmatic API. In the previous lesson, we talked about the tracker object, which is still relevant for this class as well. So if you haven't seen that lesson yet, please don't forget to take a look at that one as well, because there are some things that I'll be referring to in this lesson, which I might have introduced earlier in lesson number 4. Without further ado, let's talk about custom task and especially what these tasks are and how custom tasks fits into the whole thing. So this list that you hear, taken from the developer guide of Google Analytics, shows you all the steps that the analytics library takes after you've made the decision to send a hit to GA. So either with the GA's own send command or by firing a Google Tag Manager task. And the tasks are run through in this particular order. And the tasks will always process something called a model object. So the model object is used to take those fields that you added to your tag or to your GA tracker, to take those fields and compile them, turn them into the eventual payload that is then sent to Google Analytics. Just to take a look at what these tasks do, we'll skip custom task. It's the first one that's processed, but it by default, it actually does nothing. Custom task has no functionality of its own. You, as the user, will manipulate custom task to do your bidding. Then we have something called preview task, which basically prevents a hit to GA from being sent if the page is rendered to generate one of these top sites thumbnails that you might see in some web browsers. So one of those thumbnails you see when you open a blank browser page. GA doesn't want to collect a page view from those because it wouldn't really make sense. The user is not viewing that page, they're just viewing a thumbnail of the page. After that, if the request isn't aborted, then the check protocol task is run, which basically aborts the request if the protocol is not HTTP or HTTPS. So if you're running Google Analytics in a local file, for example, this task will abort the request because the protocol will not be HTTP or HTTPS, but will actually be file. And you can null this task. You can basically set this task to null to allow GA to fire on local files as well. Validation task checks some required fields in the request, and if they're missing or invalid, the request is aborted. Check storage task checks whether or not the browser has cookies enabled, and if cookies are disabled and the tracker itself isn't configured to handle this, then the request is aborted. History import task leverages previously set GA cookies using an older version of Google Analytics library and imports them into Universal Analytics by creating a new cookie from the information within those to preserve visitor history, for example, and cookie history as well. This was very fundamental when the migration to Universal Analytics was made mandatory. So this made sure that the user would stay the same even if the libraries are migrated from ga.js to analytics.js. Sampler task if you've set the sample rate in your tags, so not the site speed sample rate, but just the sample rate. This task will check if the user falls into the bucket of visitors that should be sampled out, and the request will be aborted if they are to be sampled out. Build hit task is fundamental. It actually builds the payload. It builds the measurement protocol request string with all the parameters taken from the tracker object and the model object, and then passes that payload to send hit task, which sends the hit to Google Analytics. So the send hit task is one of those tasks that you will end up manipulating via custom task. For example, if you want to purge the payload of certain information that shouldn't be sent to GA, such as PII, or if you want to duplicate the request to another GA property, for example, you would manipulate the send hit task. Timing task checks if the hit falls into the site speed sample rate setting. So if that site speed sample rate, if the hit is considered to be sampled for timings, page timings, then the timing task will fire a timing hit to Google Analytics to tell GA about things like page load speed and DOM load speed and so on. And finally, the display features task will send a hit to DoubleClick if display features have been enabled or advertising features have been enabled, and if it's not within the throttling time. So these tasks basically are what GA runs automatically, and they're very fundamental to how analytics.js works. And with custom task, we now have a way to manipulate how this task queue actually is processed and in what order. Let's take a quick look at how tasks work. So again, the GA debugger is an extremely helpful extension here. So we'll start with creating an empty tracker like this. So now we'll see that our tracker was created with the default name T0. And then we can take one of the tasks listed in the slide you just saw and just log something to the console when the task is executed. So let's take a couple. Let's take the, you set tasks as regular fields on the tracker. So GA set command. Let's take a couple. Let's take the check protocol task. And let's just log something like check protocol task. Then let's set the check storage task. Let's log that as well. And then let's take the send hit task. And instead of just logging an empty message, one thing to note about tasks is that the function that you pass as the value of the task is the function that is called when the task should be run. So by adding these functions as the values of check protocol task and check storage task, I'm actually overriding how those tasks work. So instead of running their default behavior, I'm overriding it. So instead of checking the protocol for HTTP or HTTPS, I'm just logging something to the console. So this means that if the protocol did not have HTTP or HTTPS, if it were like something like file, so if it were something like file, this request would now still work because I have overridden check protocol task to not check for HTTP or HTTPS. Similar for storage, if I did disable cookies, this would still work. And I'll show you an example of that soon. So the function that you pass as the parameter actually automatically gets an argument. So I didn't include it in these two earlier examples, but here I'll just call it model. It could be called, of course, whatever you want. And then I can do something like console log model. And the model has get and set features like a typical class instance. So I'll just do a model get. And the model has one field called hit payload, which is built by the build hit task. So I'm just going to log what this task would send to GA naturally, it won't send anything to GA now because I've overridden how send hit task works. I've overridden it with this custom function. So this is why send hit task will no longer work. And this is actually one of the reasons why custom task is so useful, because you can override the default functionalities of these tasks, but then allow them to complete regardless. So now I've updated that as well. So all I have to do now is just send something with this tracker and see what happens when those tasks are parsed. So here you can see that the check protocol task was run first. It logged the console check protocol task. Then check storage task was fired. It logged check storage task. And finally, the send hit task was fired, which logged the hit payload that would have been sent with the request. So this is the hit payload that would have been sent had the send hit task actually worked. And we can verify that it didn't work by looking for UA12345-1, which is the tracking ID I created the tracking with. Now you can see that the hit was not sent. So it's a pretty dangerous way to actually work with GA by manipulating these tasks directly. It's pretty dangerous. You would have to create original references to the original tasks, and it would be very, very difficult to do via GTM, because GTM doesn't let you run this kind of code that wraps functions in such a way, at least not very easily. So some of the things you can do with tasks, we'll go over those a bit later. But for example, let's say we have a situation where we have decided to block cookies from the browser. So I'm just going to go to the site settings and I'm going to block all cookies from this browser. So now if I reload the page and try to send Google Analytics hits, you can see that it says storage not available, aborting hit. So because this browser does not support saving cookies, no GA hits are being sent. You would have to specify a specific field in the Google Analytics tracker called storage and set it to the value none if you wanted to have the hits being sent anyway. But there's one way to work around this. So we can now create a new tracker. And as you can see, it generates a new client ID because I don't have cookies, so there's no GA cookie to refer to. So what I can then do is I can set check storage task to null. So I'm basically overriding the check storage task behavior, and then I can try sending a page view. And now you can see that the page view was actually sent with a new randomly generated client ID. Now, of course, because I've disabled cookies, this client ID would not persist. So I would have to figure out some kind of storage mechanism by myself, which would allow persistence of these variables. So this is how tasks work. They do specific things with the hit before it's sent to GA, and you can manipulate those tasks directly by using the set command. And in Google Tag Manager, it's easy to do as well, but I'll show that when we get to the custom task part. So in the beginning of the task list, you saw custom task. And a custom task, as I mentioned, has no specific functionality of its own. It's kind of special in that way. You actually use it only to manipulate the model object itself and the other tasks. So you can use it to set some fields in the model dynamically, and I'll show you a very specific use case for that soon. And you can use it to manipulate how the other tasks work. For example, if you want to conditionally block storage task from working, you could use custom task to check some condition on the page, and if the condition passes, then you block storage task. So you can use it to run this kind of meta level programming on the individual tasks without having to worry about fallbacks or something like that. So here we have a typical way a custom task would work. So after creating the tracker, we set the custom task field in that tracker and we pass an anonymous function. It could be a name function as well. So you can create a function reference if you wanted to, but you can also just use an anonymous function. And that function automatically gets a single parameter from the task queue. And that parameter is the model object. So in this particular example, when custom task fires, we take the model object, we set a new field in it called dimension 5, which is custom dimension index number 5, and we set its value to whatever the value of client ID is in the model object. So model object has these fields. They are the same tracker fields you'll find in Analytics.js as field reference. You can get and set those fields dynamically directly in the model object. And so why would you do this? Well, the reason you would do this is that when you run the set command, you might be wondering, why not just set dimension 5 with the set command to the client ID? Well, the problem is that before the analytics.js library has loaded, you have no idea what the client ID is because there is no interface to fetch that. Sure, you could grab it from the cookie, but that's not really reliable because there can be multiple GA cookies serving different purposes. So by confining it into this callback, this custom task callback, you're ensuring that the callback is called after the GA library has loaded, and you can manipulate the model object like this. So this is a very, very robust, I'd say it's 100% certain way to get the client ID, the anonymous client ID, and pass it as a custom dimension to Google Analytics. So then when the page view is sent, the custom dimension index number 5 is appended to the hit automatically, and it's sent to GA. And I'll show you in a bit how that works. In Google Tag Manager, the way it works is that you take a custom JavaScript variable. Custom tasks don't yet work with custom templates because they use a constructor-based object. So the model object is actually based on a constructor pattern, and this constructor pattern is not currently supported by custom templates because it opens some permission flaws into the process. So a custom JavaScript variable, which importantly has to return a function. So if you want to add this to the custom task field in your tags, the variable has to return a function. If you don't return a function, if you just try to run this in the main function body, nothing will happen because the code will be run as soon as the tag is injected, at which point the model doesn't yet exist. So this return function is essentially the same as this function model callback here in the set command. So in this particular example, we're actually manipulating how the send hit task works. So we're creating a reference to the original send hit task by creating a local variable called original send hit task that takes the send hit task for a model object. And then we set the send hit task. And the first thing we do is we send the regular send model. So the model object, we just send it to Google Analytics. We fire the send hit task with the regular send model. So this ensures that the send hit task does what it's supposed to do. It does its regular process. So we're not trying to interfere with the hit being sent to GA. And then we override the hit payload field of the send model, which is built by the build hit task, if you remember. So we take the hit payload and we replace the tracking ID with a new tracking ID in that hit payload. And then we send the hit again with the send model, original send hit task command. So this is a pretty cool way to duplicate your hit to Google Analytics by taking the exact hit payload that was just sent to UA12345-1 and now sending it to UA12345-2. And then when you add it to your Google Tag Manager tag or the Google Analytics settings variable, you add it into the fields to set with the name custom task. Now, because custom task is a field in the table of fields, you can only have a single custom task per tag, per tracker object. But there are ways to mitigate this, and I'll show them to you in just a bit. Just to illustrate the examples from the previous slides, let's take a look at how this works in practice. So we'll try the client ID trick first. So let's create a new tracker with default tracking ID I always use. Then let's set custom task to a function that takes the model object. And then we tell the model object to, hey, update your dimension number. Let's take a 150. Let's update custom dimension 150 with whatever is stored in the client ID field of the model object. And then we've just set the field. We've set the custom task to this function now. And then when we send the hit to, using the tracker object, we can now check what's sent with the hit. So we can see that dimension 150 is now sent with the client ID. So this is how we dynamically fetch the client ID from the model object and appended it to dimension 150. So that's basically how custom task works. In Google Tag Manager, let's create the custom task that we just had as an example. So for that, you need to create a custom JavaScript variable. And here, you create your basic custom JavaScript function variable body, and then you must remember to return a function. This is the custom task function that we're now returning. We can make it a bit more explicit by updating this name to custom task model. And then because we want the tag to perform its basic operation successfully, we don't want to override the send hit task with something completely new and thus blocking the hit from being sent to GA. We need to create a reference to the original send hit task, which fortunately is a field in the custom task model. So all the tasks are fields in the model object itself. So we'll take the original send hit task like this. And now that we've got the reference, now we can actually update send hit task by setting the field in the custom task model so that the model object is updated for all the subsequent tasks as well. We tell them to, hey, update the send hit task model with this function. And because send hit task is a task, it automatically gets the model object again as a parameter. And now we'll tell them to, because we want this tag to fire the hit to GA successfully, let's do original send hit task, and then we pass the argument send hit task model. So tasks also take the argument of the model when you want to run that task. And at this point, we'll take a reference to the hit payload. So original send hit task model dot get hit payload. So now we have a reference to the hit payload string, the payload string that was just sent to Google Analytics. And then we'll manipulate this a bit. So we'll say hit payload equals hit payload.replace. We'll look for all instances of the original tracking ID, and we'll update it with a new tracking ID. So we'll update all instances of UA12345-1 with -2. Naturally, this should only be in the tracking ID field, but it's possible you might have it in your custom dimension as well. And then we'll just say to send hit task model set. We're going to set the hit payload field with our local variable hit payload. So if we set it to the modified string, and then you'll set the value true last to indicate that this is only for this particular hit. It's necessary if you want to make this kind of an ad hoc manipulation. And finally, we'll use the original send hit task function to again send this model, but this time the model has the modified hit payload in it. And then we'll just close the functions. So now we have our little custom task here. It's set to look for hits to 12345-1 and send them again to 12345-2. So let's see how this works. Now we've created the variable. The next thing you need to do is find all those tags which you want to duplicate the hits. I only have this page view tag running here. So what I'll do is just add it directly to the tag. So you're looking for more settings and fields to set. And you're looking to add a new field named customTask. Now, don't worry that it doesn't always appear in the autocomplete list. That's okay. You don't need the autocomplete. And then we set the value to the JavaScript variable we just created. Now, because I had the mock UA, I'll need to remember to update this to UA12345-1. So now I'm good to go. Let's see what happens when we preview this container. And then let's take a close look at what kind of requests are being sent to Google Analytics. So let's reload this page and see what's sent. So now let's look for UA12345-1. We can see that here's the first page view. This is the regular page view sent by the original send hit task method before we manipulated the string in any way. And look at all these custom dimensions here. We have the hit timestamp and stuff like that. When we look for -2, we'll find that as well. So -2 is also sent to Google Analytics. So we'll see that the tracking ID has updated, but all the other fields stay the same. So even the hit timestamp was not modified because I took the exact hit payload string sent to -1 and I sent it to -2 as well. So we have these two hits. We duplicated the hit to -1 and we duplicated it to -2. So this is a very simple way to take a hit to Google Analytics and duplicate it to another destination. And this is how customTask works in Google Tag Manager. So we're now getting to the good part. So what kind of stuff can you actually do with customTask? Well, heads up, I've created a tool for you that you can use to create those customTask functions. It's called the customTask Builder tool, and you can see the address to the tool under the screenshot. And it has a bunch of different things you can mix and match to use the customTask efficiently. For example, we already checked how to add client ID as a custom dimension. So it's included here as the first thing you can do. You can add the hit type as a custom dimension as well. So it will programmatically check whether it was a page view tag or an event tag, or maybe a transaction or an item tag, and it will send that as a custom dimension as well. Payload length sends the length of the current hit payload as a custom dimension as well. Google Analytics has a maximum payload length of 8 kilobytes. So you can use this custom dimension to check if you're approaching that in some of your hits, because that might mean that you're surpassing that in some of your hits as well, and those hits would be dropped. Remove custom definitions has to do with the previous lesson where I quickly talked about how page speed timing hits can inadvertently include custom dimensions that are being sent to GA. This way you can avoid inflating those custom metrics thanks to the timing hit that's sent after some page views. Copy hits to multiple properties. We already showed that. I just showed that to you how to do that in GTM. Well, this lets you add multiple properties, so not just one extra, but many others. Remove PII from hits lets you specify regular expressions that are then the entire hit payload string is parsed for those, and the personally identifiable information is redacted from those calls. If you're using Snowplow, you can use this custom task to copy the hit to the Snowplow collector. There's a session cookie if you want to maintain a cookie of that abstracts or tries to approximate is a Google Analytics session currently active. You can use that. Decorate cross-domain iframes for cross-domain tracking on iframes. Prevent duplicate transactions. So if you have a situation where you're collecting more than one transaction from the same user because they're reloading the thank you page, you can use this. Obfuscation of the hit payload is a fun trick that lets you build a parallel GA property where all strings and numbers are obfuscated with garbage, with just gibberish, so that you can show your clients or show your prospects actual real GA data without them being able to discern where the data is collected from. And then there's a local storage hack to store the client ID in. So this is all part of the custom task builder tool. There are even more custom task things you can do in my guide, for which the link is below the screenshot again. Some of these haven't been incorporated into the tool itself because they're a bit more niche. But there's so many things you can do with custom task, and I can't wait for you to try these out and come up with things you can do by yourself. So just to illustrate the couple of resources I just showed you, first thing you want to check out is my custom task, the guide. So this guide has it explains how custom task works and all the different things you can do with custom task. The other thing you'll want to check out, which is the one that I'm actually way more proud of, is the custom task builder tool. And I'll show you how this tool works now. So there's of course some instructions for how to deploy it, but you'll need to first select the custom task features that you want to include in the tool. So let's take a handful of them. Let's add client ID. Let's add hit type and payload length. Let's remove personally identifiable information from hits. And let's copy the hit to a bunch of properties. Once you've selected these, you'll see the code down here. So you can either copy the code to the clipboard, which will copy the entire function declaration here, and you can use it with your regular Universal Analytics code, or you can click this copy to clipboard for GTM, which automatically removes some of the unnecessary parts. So let's click this one. I hope it did it. that was a force push. So then in variables, you need to create a new custom JavaScript variable. Oops, that was the wrong one. There we go. And then just paste everything in that code that you just copied to the clipboard into that variable. And at this point, you need to change some functionalities. There are above this do not edit anything below this line, you can see some of the things that you can manipulate. There's some of the configurations that you need to set. So the first thing is the client ID index. So we need to specify which custom dimension index to send the client ID. So let's just use some dimensions that I don't use myself. So 195 is good. Hit type, we need a custom dimension index to where you want to send the hit type. So was it a page view or an event or whatever? So let's take 196. Payload length, so we need a custom dimension index to where you want to send the length of the payload of the request. So let's use 197 for that. And then we need an array of all the tracking IDs to where you want to duplicate the hit. So let's just add a couple here. And then one more. So I'm going to send every hit that uses this custom task to 4 different destinations. The original destination, and then UA 12345-1, -2, and -3. And then we have a regular expression, an array of regular expression objects where you indicate what type of personally identifiable information are you looking for. So the first one that's there by default is email, and it's looking for the regular expression is very simple. Any 4 characters, then an @ symbol, and then any 4 characters. So that's what has to be as the value of any parameter sent to Google Analytics. It's not very robust. I mean, there will be a lot of false positives and maybe even some false negatives if you have a very short name as the first part of the email, for example. But you can modify it to your liking. Let's add another one. Let's do this called CMO. So let's say that I want to remove all references to my name. So then I'll just do like this. So now all reference to my name should be purged from the hit payload, and I'll show you what it looks like. So once we're done with that, we'll save this variable. Let's give it a name. Let's call it customTask again. And now the kind of the most robust way to do it is to add it to your settings variable. Take customTask here and just set it to look for customTask the field and set it to customTask like this. And then I'll just need to make sure that I'm not overriding customTask in my page view tag, which I think I am doing unnecessarily. So let's remove that and then save it. Then we're ready to preview the container. And now if you remember, there was some PII detection tools, detection regexes here. So let's try to mimic some PII. Let's do fake email equals someone@google.com, like this. But before I do anything, so now the URL is fake email at someone. And then there was another where I was looking for the word CMO, and that should be redacted. So let's add that as a URL parameter as well. So who is CMO equals me. So let's see what happens. It's really hidden in that parameter. So let's send that hit to GA. So let's see, first of all, what preview mode claims is being sent to GA. And this is kind of important. So preview mode will not tell you anything about those custom dimensions that you set with customTask. Preview mode only knows what's being set in those fields in the tag itself. So, there's no index 195, 196, or 197. They're all ignored. It's not going to tell you that, hey, this hit was sent 3 times to different properties. So preview mode is not a very good tool to debug your customTask with. For that, I recommend using the network request. So let's take a look at what's happening. Here's the first page view that's sent to my regular tracking ID. So let's start looking at what happens. First of all, in the document location, you can see that my name was redacted from the host name, thankfully. My email was redacted from the fake query parameter, and the CMO was redacted from the who is CMO parameter as well, which is pretty cool. Then you'll find 195 has the client ID, 196 has the hit type, and 197 has the payload length. So 700 characters was the length of this payload. Then we replicated this hit to 3 other tracking IDs. So let's see if that worked as well. Redacted information, and so on. New tracking ID. The next hit, redacted information, new tracking ID. And finally, redacted information and a new tracking ID. So this is how the customTask builder works. You're able to combine different parts of customTask into one coherent whole, and they're all sent to GA successfully. Especially the PII detection is extremely powerful because it doesn't just look for PII in the page path. It will look for PII in any of your fields. Any custom dimension, if they had the word CMO or email address, would have been redacted. So typically the typical places where you look for PII is in the URL, but there are so many different places where you can actually accidentally collect PII in. And the customTask builder's PII detection method lets you find that PII wherever it might be in the hit payload. The important thing is to, of course, have this customTask firing in for all your tags, because even a single tag that doesn't have this customTask can export that PII to Google Analytics. So this is how the customTask builder resource works. So let's take another look at the objectives that have been covered in this class. So we've talked about Google Analytics tasks and what they do. I showed you how those tasks work, and I showed you a couple of them to illustrate what they actually do when building that hit and sending it to GA. We talked about how customTask works and how it's kind of special in the way that you actually use it to manipulate the other tasks and the model object itself. And finally, we played around with the customTask Builder tool and looked at a couple of resources that you might find useful when working with customTask. The resources are listed here as well. So we have the customTask Builder tool, which I have created for you to help you build that JavaScript necessary for customTask to work. Then there's the customTask guide, which includes a lot of information about how customTask works, but also a number of different solutions that did not make it into the customTask Builder tool itself. And finally, you can just check the tag customTask on my blog to find all the articles I've written about customTask. I really suggest and recommend that you take the time to look at customTask because it's definitely one of the most powerful things in Google Analytics, especially when you're using GTM to send that data to GA.
So how about that customTask, huh? If you agree with me, it's one of the most useful ways you can really take your Google Analytics setup and just twist it and mold it into something that your organization can actually use. I'm a huge fan of customization myself. I think there's nothing as important as customizing your analytics setups. And with a tool like customTask, well, it's already in the name. It's a way to customize your setups to a maximum. So in this class, we went over a number of things you can do with customTask. And I also showed you how the customTask Builder tool works that I created specifically to help you build those little setups that you can use to improve your analytics data collection. So our next lesson will be the last one of this Google Analytics group, and we'll be talking about enhanced e-commerce. So if you're ready, let's take a look at that.